Yeah, and thanks so much for having me on your show. Look, I am all for transparency because the public deserves to know about what's going on with their leaders. And yes, it is true. Joe Biden was old. There's no way around that. But that's also exactly why he stepped aside and dropped out of the presidential race last year, proving that he cared more about democracy than his own power. He
Ashwin, is it
also
fair?
still had
So I was just gonna say, is it fair to because he himself did not want to step out of the race. I think it was all of his advisors who ended up convincing him to do that because they saw the potential negative electoral outcome.
I mean, again, he did drop out at the end of the day. And I would say he still had the basic cognitive clarity to accept the results of a free and fair election. He also never defied Supreme Court rulings, talked about jailing judges, or said he doesn't know if he needs to uphold the Constitution. So, yes, Biden was aging. And when you talk about his cognitive clarity, I would say he actually has a better cognitive clarity, regardless of what he was going through, than our current president, who is
Right,
unraveling.
but
And
Well,
again,
that's
that should
that's
be
a
the story.
stretch. That's a
but the
stretch
quite
for anybody to make.
let me
Quite frankly, the question isn't about the Constitution. The question's not about what this president's doing right now. The reason we're here, the segment is was Joe Biden's
yeah.
health hidden from the American people? And quite frankly, it was. And I think the American people realize that 4 more years of a Kamala Harris presidency would have only been more secrets, more distraction, more lies to the American people. What could we have possibly trusted the puppet that was Kamala Harris in the cognitive decline Biden presidency?
Rob, let me ask you this though, because like as I mean, the focus should be on Joe Biden right now because that is the story that was withheld. I mean, if you want to talk about Donald Trump, that is a whole other conversation that we should have. But if we talk about what this means for the presidency more broadly speaking, Chuck Todd mentioned this again in the last segment. Does this prove because Donald Trump hasn't been that transparent necessarily with his cognitive records either? You've seen him say yesterday in the Oval Office that he had a great physical and that his cognitive abilities are superb, but there hasn't been a whole lot of evidence released. But again, not focusing on Donald Trump, just more broadly speaking, should we make it mandatory that people and candidates have to take a cognitive test? And if that was the case, would these problems with Joe Biden perhaps have come out sooner?
I don't know if I necessarily agree with the idea of an IQ or a cognitive test in order to become president. I think we go back to litmus tests when we start talking about that. But I
Mm.
do think that there's a standard that we need to be able to uphold once you are president of the United States. And that is on the White House medical unit. These are military officers in some cases that have sworn an oath to the Constitution, to my colleague's point, that the oath to the Constitution should outride the oath to the man. And so that if they do see a president like Joe Biden starting to slip from a cognitive point, if they are starting to see some massive medical issues that come to take place, there should probably be a system in place to disclose that to the American people and not put the American people into a situation where it's now a puppet White House being run by unelected Democrat advisors who have no vote record, no policy standpoint from the point of view of the American people in which to have any basis of trust. There's a question on the table here is for how long did Joe Biden not have control of his White House? And I think that's a very important answer that we need to get as quickly as possible.
Can I ask you, Ashwan, because there's a number of people right now who were great supporters of Joe Biden, and all of a sudden, after the Joe Biden or Kamala Harris lost the election, now they're coming out and they're bashing Joe Biden and they're saying all of these things. But like, my question is, where were they before the election? And I'll give you an example. I mean, there's someone named Lindy Lee who was a huge Biden supporter and now all of a sudden is a huge Trump supporter as soon as Kamala Harris lost the election, which to me, I would say that's an example of political opportunism. But how many of the people who were supporting Biden were doing so out of political opportunism, hoping that maybe if he wins again, they would end up having some type of appointment or perhaps political favor?
I mean, if we're talking about political favors and appointments, again, there's no better example than what President Trump is
Let's
doing
stay,
right
let's stay
now.
focused on Joe Biden, though, just right now. I mean, we talked about Donald
Yeah.
Trump plenty of times on the show, but
Well, I think it's important when you're talking about cognitive ability and what's actually being told to the public, right? You talk about a puppet White House, but Biden was still able to lower prescription drug prices, made the largest ever investments in clean energy and climate, led the fastest post pandemic recovery among advanced economies, canceled student debt for over 4 million Americans, and again, had the humility to drop out of the race. And when it comes to why Democrats lost the presidential, and I actually talk about this in my book, Project 2027. It's not that the Harris campaign was a failed campaign. It raised $1 billion in just 4 months. It was actually because the Democratic establishment still focused more on fundraising than grassroots campaigning and led away from progressive issues like a Medicare for all or living wages that so many voters desperately cared about and needed and wanted.
Are you comfortable, though, Ashra? Because like the what I'm trying to get at here is just I find it interesting specifically that Democrats were not coming forward in their own right. I mean, like when Dean Phillips, when I interviewed him when he was running for president, he was like one of the few Democrats who was out calling for Joe Biden to step down, and Democrats within the party were making him feel like horrible for just coming out and calling on something that ended up becoming mainstream and ended up becoming what kind of the general public wanted. So how do you make a Democratic Party where people actually feel as if they can express their mind? Because I mentioned this to Chuck Todd too. I mean, I got a message from a Democrat who was in Washington just a few weeks before Joe Biden had stepped down as the nominee, and he would tell me that he would hear some Democrats defending Joe Biden on TV, and then 2 minutes later, behind the scenes, they would be bashing him in private.
Yeah, again, we need transparency. I've also been someone who has called out Joe Biden when he was president on certain key issues, especially what's happened, what happened with the Middle East and the Gaza situation. I think we need more people, to your point, who are able to call out leadership, regardless of when that is. And again, it's relevant to right now because we're not having the same transparency and ability to challenge our leaders right now. So that is something that we need to continue pushing forward. We need transparency. Yes, I agree. We need someone who's actually able to lead, not only cognitively, but ethically and morally. That is very important. And we need to focus on tangible issues that are actually focused on voters' kitchen table.
Okay, we'll leave the conversation there. Ashwani Jain and Rob Burgess. Really appreciate both of your time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Okay,
Thank you.
we're gonna take a quick break. When we return, we're gonna talk to two people